Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to be answering the question of what price can Bitcoin reach by the year 2030? So as we get 2024 started, we're only 6 years away from 2030, 6 to 7 years, I guess. But answering that question and thinking about some of the price projections and predictions for the price of Bitcoin when we get to the year 2030 is what's on the agenda today. As always, before we dive into the topic, if you can hit the thumbs up button below, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and hit the bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date with everything in the Bitcoin and crypto space and hit your crypto goals. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the video. And the first thing we're going to look at is the ARK Invest price prediction in terms of price targets over the next few years. And this is the same ARK Invest who just had their Bitcoin spot ETF approved a few days ago. And as we move into this next 6 to 7 years towards the year 2030, ARK Invest put together a price prediction roadmap based on a bear, base, and bullish case scenarios. So we'll break this down a little bit further in a moment, but at a high level, what we've got is a bear case target of 258,000 by the year 2030. As a base case, we've got 682,800, and as a bull case, we've got a 1.48 million price prediction. So it's interesting to look at, a number of different models and forecasting mechanisms, even though it's obviously near impossible to predict the exact value. It's interesting to run these models, think about different price predictions and how people are coming up with their unique perspectives on where the price of Bitcoin is going to go. So what are these prices based on? Well, what ARK Invest did was basically they took a look at the different markets and use cases that Bitcoin has already begun to penetrate, but the different use cases that Bitcoin will continue to penetrate over the coming years. And this is exactly what they've based their bear case, base case, and bull case numbers on. So you're seeing these exact same numbers in this table. But what we have in this column is the different use cases for Bitcoin. So Bitcoin as digital gold, the total addressable market of the gold market cap. We've got the potential for Bitcoin as institutional investment. I think we're going to see a lot more of this happening now that the ETFs have been approved and institutions begin to allocate a certain percentage of their portfolios and client portfolios into the Bitcoin ETF. Caesar resistant assets. We've got economic settlement network, emerging market currency, another very interesting one. We've got countries like El Salvador, and other emerging markets beginning to use Bitcoin as legal tender, and obviously that is only projected to continue to grow. Nation-state treasury, again, thinking about nation-states holding a certain percentage of their reserves in Bitcoin, as a remittance asset, and then Bitcoin for corporate treasury as well. So we also broke down in a separate video on the channel about a number of different companies, public companies that are holding Bitcoin as part of their corporate treasury. You can go check that out. But the point here is that Bitcoin is basically going to continue to penetrate all of these different use cases, and those use cases are what ARK Invest has used in their Big Ideas report to come up with these price targets over the next 6 to 7 years. So the penetration rate is obviously outlined in this column, and the penetration rates here for each of these use cases is what these price targets are based on for the bear case, base case, and bullish case scenarios. So very interesting to think about breaking down all of the different use cases that Bitcoin can actually penetrate and how much of the market share it can penetrate and capture with each of those. So another thing worth considering with the adoption rate of Bitcoin over the next 6 to 7 years is the rate at which other technologies have been adopted and how Bitcoin compares to those. So what we're seeing in this chart here is the adoption rate of different technologies in the US specifically. What we've got over here is basically since the beginning of the 1900s, we've got the chart showing us all the various technologies like the mobile phone, electricity, automobiles, television, air travel, credit cards, gaming, computers, personal PCs, the internet, cameras, etc., all the way up to Bitcoin here on the right-hand side. And there's a couple of interesting points to see on this chart, which are, you'll notice that at the beginning of the 1900s, with the adoption of technologies like the mobile phone, we can see the adoption starts off very slow and is a very slow adoption rate, and then we get a bigger S-curve happening afterwards. And that's the case with a lot of these earlier technologies in terms of the way in which they were adopted. We can see the same with the automobile and the way that it's kind of a slower, gradual S-curve. But as we move to the right-hand side of this chart, we can see that the acceleration that has happened in terms of adoption with the newer technologies on the list is a much more dramatic adoption rate. The S-curves and the adoption rates are almost straight up when it comes to, the amount of time that technology took to reach saturation in the market above 80% is happening in a much more rapid fashion with things like the internet, the digital camera, the smartphone, the tablet. So it'll be extremely interesting to see how Bitcoin begins to grow in terms of adoption rate over the next 6 to 7 years towards the year 2030. There's some different arguments about what the actual adoption rate of Bitcoin is. I think based on a lot of the numbers that I've seen, we're probably somewhere around the 3 to 4% mark. So an extremely low global adoption rate when it comes to Bitcoin. That percentage and that number is definitely a little bit higher in the US specifically, but the adoption rate of Bitcoin is still sub 5%. And this hockey stick growth, this parabolic growth that we can expect to see as the network continues to grow over the next years is going to be super interesting to see, firstly, how it maps visually here compared to these other technologies, but also thinking about the price action that will follow based on the adoption rate acceleration here as we begin to get more and more saturation in terms of Bitcoin adoption. So another chart worth considering and super interesting to review in terms of the adoption of Bitcoin and how that will affect the price going forward. And what we've got on this chart is kind of a similar mapping to the above, but we've just taken the Bitcoin price and we're mapping it against both cell phone adoption and internet adoption, their S-curves, and putting Bitcoin alongside them here and projecting out the price prediction based on if Bitcoin follows and continues to follow the same adoption rate as cell phones and the internet. So internet adoption is this orange line, we've got cell phone adoption as the blue line, and then the Bitcoin actual price has been, pretty much correlated with both of those in terms of adoption curves as we map it here over the course of time. And similar maybe to the ARK Invest numbers above, we've got numbers of about 1.2 million if Bitcoin follows the same trajectory for adoption as cell phone adoption. It would hit a valuation of 1.246 million by the year 2030. And if it followed the same adoption rate as the internet, it would hit a valuation of about 343,000, which I think is definitely on the lower end when we're talking about 2030. And it's worth considering that the rate of mobile phone adoption did see more of that parabolic growth versus the internet adoption, which was a little bit slower here. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But again, another model for us to think about Bitcoin adoption and price action as a result of adoption. Once again, this is a similar chart to the above, but this one was created by Fidelity, where again we're mapping this one is mapping the price of Bitcoin alongside the amount of Bitcoin addresses with more than $1 worth of Bitcoin in them against mobile phone users per 100 people and internet users as a percentage of population. So the pink line is obviously the mobile growth adoption per 100 users, and the purple line is the growth model for internet users per percentage of population. And once again, as we move towards the year 2030, right about here, we are seeing it, the price, if it trends towards more of the mobile phone user adoption, we are seeing that similar price projection, just over $1 million here. And then with the correlation for the internet users per population, again, we're seeing more of that $300,000 to $400,000 per Bitcoin range by the year 2030. So the other and the final thing we're going to look at is the stock to flow model, which again is something we've looked at on this channel before. So if you want to check out some of the other videos, feel free to do so. But basically, this is mapping Bitcoin stock to flow. And we know that due to the halving event that we have with Bitcoin every 4 years and the diminishing supply that is available as a reward to miners getting cut in half every 4 years, that means that the price action, it basically causes a supply shock for the Bitcoin network, which tends to drive price in a 4-year cycle that we've mapped out and have looked at on this channel before. But the stock to flow model, as mapped out over the past few cycles, and as we project that out into the future, would see Bitcoin hitting somewhere around a $5 million Bitcoin per Bitcoin by the year 2030 as well. So we've obviously got a halving event happening this year in 2024. The next halving event will take place in 2028. And typically what we see with these halving events is a new all-time high with the price of Bitcoin in the preceding 12 to 18 months after the halving event. So perhaps that aligns very nicely with the fact of the 2028 halving happening, possibly the middle of the year in 2028, and then thinking about 12 to 18 months after that and the correlation with this 2030 price prediction, we could be in a range here around the year 2030 for a new all-time high after that 2028 halving event. So again, it's almost impossible to predict the exact price here for what Bitcoin will hit in the year 2030, but very interesting to take a look at some of these different models, take a look at different adoption rates and adoption curves from other technologies and how Bitcoin compares to those, and how price action can be driven by adoption rates over time. And, you know, also thinking about all of the different use cases that Bitcoin has and how much of those use cases it can penetrate over the next few years, and how much value can it extract from, you know, institutional money, or as a reserve, or as a treasury reserve for nation states and corporations. So it'll be super interesting to see it all play out. Let us know in the comments below if you've got your own price prediction for Bitcoin by the year 2030. As always, if you enjoy these videos, please leave a thumbs up below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications to hit your crypto goals. We'll see you in the next one.